You want to help me? I've covered UDM. IFP? Noted here? Okay. Have I covered all the parties now that are represented here today? Okay. No, I'm not avoiding you. AI. You know, you've got a problem because you're sharing the colors of your flag with another party. AIC. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for welcoming me so well out in Cape Town. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just wanted to say these are the parties that are here, and for the purpose of the press also, so that they must know. At about 10 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen, we are at 10:10. Our communications people are telling us that some of the leaders of the parties who might be requested to go out also for a press questions and answers. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am now going to be calling upon, this is the work of partnership between Moral Regeneration and also with SALGA. And I am going to request the Councillor Nawa, who's the National Deputy Chairperson of SALGA, to come and give us the message of support from our partner. And then, yes, that's the message of support from Mr. Councillor Nawa.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Electoral Commission of South Africa, the Chairperson of the Moral Regeneration Forum Culture, the leadership of the different political parties in our country, the Honorable Speaker of the Eastern Cape Legislature, in absentia, the Deputy Speaker of Gauteng Legislature, the CEO of SALGA and the team as a whole. On behalf of the National Executive Committee of the South African Local Government Association, we join in celebrating this partnership. Part of our message as we support this program, we want to reflect the belief that in 1955, June 25, the people of South Africa came together and agreed that we do need to build a non-racial democratic South Africa, which is non-sexist, also non-racial, but equally the country that should be very prosperous in its own nature. And 20 years later, here we meet again to affirm the South African Constitution that was adopted in 1996, that we are a people that should live under the rule of law, we should promote human dignity, but we should equally promote equality as a people of this country. And in local government, we have traveled for almost 16 years so far in building what we all thought it's important to build. So as SALGA and the National Executive Committee leadership, we are very happy about this partnership with Moral Regeneration Movement. At the core of it is that we should call upon all political parties in our country to work together and to ensure that we continue to live to the dreams of those who built this democracy and live to ensure that we get a better country. So the evolution of local government, there's so much achievement, and we have seen towns changing, we have seen where we come from in rural places, the system changed, people have access to basic government services. And that has helped us, a lot of us, to be able to appreciate what local government can do. And as we approach the local government election on the 3rd of August, at the core of what we need to agree upon is that let's avoid unethical things. Let's build a country that all of us can be proud about. And therefore, SALGA, in partnership with Moral Regeneration, is to really come to pull all of us and say, let's work to better the lives of our people. As I indicated about achievements so far, we would not amiss of us to say there's no challenges. There are a lot of challenges in our country. And I think meetings like this one, in where we are convened is at the purpose of how best we can improve ethical leadership. And I'm sure as we call upon all political parties that it will be good before we even approve the list of those who are going to lead our people, that we check whether all these people are ethical and are able to stand the test of ethics, that they are able to lead us in a moral way. The South African Local Government Association, as part of the inductions to incoming councillors, we have created a chapter that's going to focus on ethical leadership and ensure that councillors who are going to lead us from 2016 and forward, they actually have a full appreciation of what is being ethical. I would imagine if there were no cases of corruption in our country, how far would we be as a nation? So far, we think we would actually have to limit headlines that are about corruption and headlines that are about development and that covers the rest of our people. So I stand here on behalf of the National Executive Committee to say we all have a role to play, and at the core of what we need to do is to build a non-racial democratic South Africa where all our people have access to basic services, where all our people move from the periphery of our economy, but they are part of what we call today wall-to-wall municipalities. And certainly all our people are represented in local government. There's no person in South Africa which is outside the ward. And that helps us to ensure that we can have, everybody could have access to basic services. I want to sit with this understanding that we have traveled for more than 16 years as local government. We have seen better things coming up, but we think we can do better as South Africa. So let's enjoin all political parties to be ethical, to be moral, and we're able to change the landscaping of our country for good. One of the things that still worry us as the leadership of SALGA is the divisions of that the focus of local government should not only be in urban areas. Even those who are in far rurals must have access to basics. They must have equal as those who are in our suburban towns have. In that program, Director, I want to thank this partnership is strategic for SALGA. It's strategic that we all build ethical leadership. And I'm sure there's been emphasis. The Chief Justice has actually come very strong the day before yesterday about ethical leadership. And I'm saying it is the things that we should live to. Every public representative must be ethical and be able to pass ethical tests. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I think what we just heard now from Councillor Nawa is very important. This project has two legs in it, this particular phase. This signing is going to move on to, after the elections, there is going to be an induction period of the councillors and the structures that shall be formed. Part of the induction shall include the ethical and values-driven leadership program. And we are partnering also there with the University of South Africa, UNISA, to actually look at that seriously. So I'm happy that it came not from me but from my bosses. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I am now going to be calling for the leader of the MRM, the man that is very much known in the circles of leadership in this country, who has been the Deputy Minister of Education in this country, the man that has been the Mayor of Tshwane, so he will speak boldly when he speaks about local government, and that's the man also that has been sitting also in SALGA. So now he is the chairperson of the Moral Regeneration Movement. Father Mkhatshwa will be giving us some insight into the charter and also embracing you and welcoming you. Father Mkhatshwa.
Program Director, MRM board members, honorable members of parliament and leaders of political parties here present, Deputy Chairperson of SALGA, who has just addressed us, Councillor Nawa, accompanied by the CEO of SALGA, Uxolile George, our Speaker of the Day, Professor Paulus Zulu, the Deputy Speaker of the Gauteng Province, Uhuru, they call him Moilwa. And then, of course, our very special Speaker of the Eastern Cape. I'll say very special because she has come all the way to be with us today. And those of you who remember, she was the former Premier of that province. So we're very happy to have them here. Now, if I may just say so, that as you probably are aware, that speakers are actually responsible for public participation. And it is therefore most appropriate that they are here with us today. We have invited other speakers also to participate with us in the rolling out of this program. I'll also like to acknowledge the representatives of the Ahmed Kathrada, Helen Suzman, or Artambo Foundations. Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a singular honor for me to welcome you to witness the signing and endorsement of the MRM's Charter of Election Ethics. It would be remiss of me not to thank in particular SALGA, with whom we have just signed an MOU, and we therefore have a very close relationship. Your presence here, ladies and gentlemen, underscores the significance of this event. We chose this venue because it is the custodian of the supreme law of the land, our constitutional court. The other reason being that we have the women's prison, where quite a lot of eminent women of the struggle were incarcerated for months and years to fight for the freedom of this country, and especially to enjoy the vote. We chose this venue, as I've said, because it is very significant and it's closely associated with what we'll be doing here today. As we are here, I salute the judiciary for passing two groundbreaking judgments whose effects are still reverberating around the country. One is on the Tlokwe by-elections, the second being the definition of the powers of the public protector, which was necessitated by Advocate Thuli Madonsela's report on the Nkandla scandal. The court displayed its brilliant sense of jurisprudence, courage, integrity, and fairness. Both judgments remind us that the Constitution is not just a document to be referred to from time to time. It is a living testimony to our democracy and freedom. Through its Bill of Rights, that document has given us the power and the right to choose leaders or political parties to manage the affairs of our country from time to time. Implied also is the right to withdraw that mandate if elected representatives betray their trust, fail to deliver on their promises, or improve material conditions of the country. Honorable members, shortly before the general election of 2014, we produced a much acclaimed document called the Charter of Election Ethics. It was a result of an in-depth reflection on how democracy had played itself out over the past 2 decades, particularly with regard to voting patterns. In applauding the sterling work of the IEC and political parties, we concluded that there was a need to complement their work by highlighting the crucial role of ethics and moral values in the entire electoral system. Now, some of our observations. 22 years into our democracy, the political landscape has both changed and remained the same. What has changed? The vote is no longer a means to remove an oppressive apartheid regime that was done effectively in 1994. Voting has assumed a much broader and critical proportions for our freedom and democracy. There are more political parties that are contesting the election. A huge cohort of young voters has actually emerged, a cohort that tends to be also fairly literate. Voting patterns are no longer rigidly along racial or ethnic lines. A number of voters has increased significantly. Of course, we're also looking at the role that money has come to influence the outcomes of our votes. Maybe that's a topic for another day. And that's why in other countries there is absolute transparency with regard to who funds whom. You were just making a point that money seems to become a very, very, very important factor. Now, most voters, as I've already pointed out, tend to be fairly educated. Now, in contrast, certain realities have remained the same or have only changed at a snail's pace. For instance, the gap between the rich and the poor, disparity in terms of service delivery between the rich and the underclass, differences in the provision of quality education between the wealthy and poor communities, unemployment, especially among young people, residues of racism and tribalism, and so forth. Elections, including democratic elections, have common characteristics. For example, elections have been referred to as a war. It's a form of war. Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Cruz are fighting an election. Fighting. Now, each one of them and their campaign managers are digging up and throwing any missile at one another, as long as it is done within the ambit of the law. American voters have the right to literally undress every candidate to ensure that the final winner befits their image of what an ideal president should be. Other common features in elections is a propensity of campaigners to indulge in hyperbole and theatrics. People enjoy public political debate, especially when they are televised or broadcast. They are fascinated by the display of the cut and thrust of political engagement. Candidates of political parties are obviously the public faces of their manifestos and their policies. We hope that the Charter of Election Ethics, which we are presenting to you formally today, will make a modest contribution in ensuring that voters in 2016 will do so with a heightened level of consciousness and responsibility. The core drivers of a peaceful, free and fair election include the following. And these are the categories of players to whom we are addressing our message contained in the booklet that you have in your folder. Voters, including first-time voters, ratepayers, security personnel, IEC, obviously, political parties, the media, and independent observers. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to leave you with some pearls of wisdom from Mahatma Gandhi. The things that will destroy us are politics without principle, pleasure without conscience, wealth without work, knowledge without character, business without morality, science without humanity, and worship without sacrifice. Underlying the statement is that whatever we do should be regulated by limits which in their turn should be based on principle and morality. MRM wishes all the parties, the IEC, and the voters a memorable and successful 2016 election. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Father. Thank you. Well, the boss has spoken, so all shall adhere. And some people are disturbing me.
And that is our constitution. We also need strong value systems.
Yes, we want a strong value system. The only strong value systems are the ones that hold our constitution and our building. We need leaders who are moral and competent. Just need to scan you, Baba.
Hey, Hilda, please check for models.
I'm not sensing any ethics.
These are the young people that we have been working with as MRM to try and actually convey this message of acting ethically and voting responsibly. You shall be seeing them a lot. Both Speaker Eastern Cape and Gauteng, I request that call them. They will do wonders for you in conveying the message. And let me be quick also to say Gauteng and ourselves, the Gauteng legislature, and SALGA and MRM has actually started, Madam Speaker, with the voter education, and we have signed an MOU. We are doing house-to-house visits and also getting into talking about the charter. So we are challenging parties. Parties, we want you to also call us to say how are you going to be spreading the message of the charter. Now, having said that, are they still building? Are they still checking someone ethics and all that? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are just about to listen to our EFF has just arrived. They need corporal punishment. And let me acknowledge the EFF, and let me acknowledge also the arrival of IFP. They've just arrived just about the same time. I hope we were not planning something against us. Okay, we want to acknowledge IFP. Let's start with EFF. Thank you very much. IFP. Thank you very much. Communications, please tell me when press is ready. We are going to be listening now to Professor Zulu. And let me say this, that inside your folders, you will also find the Charter of Positive Values. And that's our main Bible. And Professor Zulu has been also part of the team that actually developed those values. He has been in MRM one of those leaders in KZN that we depend on intellectual, academic, and sometimes parental guidance. And today he's going to speak to us. And I see he's the kind of a person who hits it on the head. And he is going to speak to us in a few minutes. Professor Zulu. He comes from the University of UKZN. Please, can you give Professor Zulu a hand and welcome him, please?
Mr. Program Director, distinguished leaders, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, all protocol observed. I decided to call the title of this presentation, Democracy Floats in a Sea of Ethics. It's an adaptation from a pronouncement made by a famous judge in the United States with regard to law. L. Warren, Chief Justice of the United States in the 1950s, once remarked that in civilized life, law floats in a sea of ethics. It was L. Warren who ruled that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional, thus legally bringing racially separated schooling in the United States to an end. The remark by Chief Justice Warren could not have been more apt than is in the case of democracy, especially our nascent democracy built on the ashes of colonialism and apartheid, where ethics was compromised by ideology and the power relations operating at the time. We are gathered here today at the invitation of the Moral Regeneration Movement and its partners to present the Charter of Election Ethics to the political parties, civil society, particularly political parties contesting the opportunity to govern our municipalities. It was former President Nelson Mandela who in 1998, on recognizing that our nascent democracy was showing signs of moral decay, suggested that the country was in need of a reconstruction and development program of the soul, the RDP of the soul, and invited religious leaders, and together they proposed the formation of the moral regeneration movement. It is in response to that call by the MRM that led to the formulation of this Charter of Politics, of Election Ethics. Now, what is the context in which the Charter is formulated? The context is that elections form a key component in the functioning of representative democracy. I want to underline the word representative democracy. Unarguably, representative democracy carries with it heavy moral responsibilities because public representatives are entrusted with the allocation and distribution of public resources. Public representatives are entrusted with the allocation and distribution of public resources, and these resources are finite. In other words, taking and apportioning a certain amount of resources elsewhere might entail depriving somewhere of the same resources. The underlying principle is equity. It is a delegated responsibility. Public representatives, and by extension government, exercises delegated power, and sovereignty resides in the demos, the people that delegated governments. Hence the Latin phrase, delegata potestas non potest delegare. In other words, delegates can never be greater or bigger than those that delegated them. However, because the very authority upon which sovereignty is located derives from the operational norms and values, sovereignty is relative and contextual to the normative moral order. In other words, in spite of this underlying principle, there can be created cultures where delegation becomes distorted. The power of institutions is therefore both relative to and derivative from the normative moral order. However, it has become common cause that our politics is going through serious tensions between competing conceptions of democracy and, by implication, governance in the politics of transformation in South Africa. In other words, our politics of transformation is riddled with man-made contradictions, where the original principles can be distorted through the exercise of power. Indeed, it is these contending conceptions of democracy that have resulted in the problems confronting our state in the first 2 decades of our democracy. Now, what are these problems? The first one is gross inequalities, what I refer to as the democratic deficit. Political systems have collapsed through revolutions, more from structural inequalities than from poverty per se. I was once part of a serious meeting between Peter Berger, the esteemed sociologist from Boston University, and Fatima Meer, a political activist and an incisive sociologist in her own right. At this meeting, Peter Berger posited poverty as a cause for popular disaffection and probably rebellion. It is not poverty per se, retorted Mir. When everyone is poor, people live peacefully side by side. It is when poverty is juxtaposed to wealth that the people riot. South Africa may be approaching the threshold where poverty juxtaposed to wealth might lead to a rebellion. Statistics South Africa reports that 10.2 million people live below the breadline of 321 rands a month. But the richest 20% consume over 61% of the goods and services available in the country. This demonstrates that the problem is not simply poverty, but that it is exacerbated by structural inequalities, making South African society the most unequal in the world, with the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient is a measure of the gap between the rich and the poor. And our Gini coefficient is 0.69, 0.69, about 0.7. The closer to 1 the figure is, the more unequal the society is. So we're very close to 1. This represents a democratic deficit. Admittedly, South Africa has historically been a country of mansions and shacks. However, the persistence of the same gross inequalities in a post-apartheid dispensation calls for deep introspection. We can't keep on saying it's the legacy of apartheid. We need to introspect very severely. The second problem is performance in government, what I call the human rights deficit. South Africa has earned herself the title of protest capital of the world, with protests which generally turn violent, originating from two sources. Source one, disaffection with the pace of delivery of basic services such as housing, water and sanitation, and directed mainly at local government. And wage and salary strikes directed mainly at employers, including government as probably the largest employer. On the other side, such endemic and violent protests illustrate the paradox in South Africa's responsiveness to the concerns of her citizens. For instance, since democracy, South Africa has performed exceptionally well in the provision of houses and in the reticulation of electricity, water, and sanitation. Simultaneously with this good performance, the growing gap between rich and poor, exacerbated by the corruption of the political and bureaucratic elite, openly demonstrated in conspicuous consumption, has fueled perceptions of a wealthy state unwilling to share the vast resources with her citizens. Secondly, there are huge disparities in the quality of services. There are several instances where state-provided housing is of poor workmanship, such that some of the buildings collapse and have to be reconstructed or need major repairs to leaking water pipes in the buildings. There are areas of water pipe leaks in our community water standpipes, resulting in intermittent supply, faulty electrical connections, and in some areas, residents who applied for housing have been in the queue for far too long. Just for an example, in the village that I come from, I no longer live in it, in Itopo, there is a village water supply. I think in a period of a year, that water supply doesn't run for more than 3 months. It counts as one of the reticulated villages. I have had to buy 2 water tanks for my sister because I'm there. What about the people where I am not there, who do not have a professor in their house? We say we have reticulated water in the villages. It's intermittent. It's not there all the time. Affected and dissatisfied citizens blame this state of affairs on nepotism and political favoritism in the awarding of tenders to service providers, together with the corruption of political and bureaucratic officials. There are instances where, despite shoddy workmanship, the same contractors are awarded tenders for new work. Therefore, while the state can claim a good record in terms of the housing units constructed and the electricity and water connections made, the service is erratic, inconsistent, and bureaucratic, thus causing alienation between government and citizens. On the side of human rights, reported cases of rape in South Africa indicate 171 cases each day of approximately 500,000 cases per annum, making South Africa the #1 rape culprit in the world. Approximately 49 persons are murdered each day, according to the police crime reports in September 2015. A third of the youth aged between 15 and 24 years are neither at school nor in employment. There are just few selected statistics on the human rights deficit. Now, we will be surprised why in protest action, I'm not a psychologist, why in protest action there is such alienation and violence. The people who go into the streets have nothing to lose and everything to gain. We often say, why do they burn their libraries? Which I honestly think is not a good thing at all. But what have they to gain from a library that they have no access to? The library is for the reading and the learned. If you can't read and you cannot understand what's in the library, it makes no use to you. It's of no asset. Frantz Fanon, in his book Les Damnes de la Terre, which is mistranslated to the wretched of the earth instead of the damned of the earth, expresses the deep plight of citizens in post-liberation states. And I quote Frantz Fanon here: "The peasant who goes on scratching out a living from the soil, and the unemployed man who never finds employment do not manage, in spite of public holidays and flags, new and brightly colored though they may be, to convince themselves that anything has really changed in their lives," I unquote. It's very typical. We have all our public holidays meant to be national days. Our political leaders come and speak. The peasant who has nothing to eat or to work with, literally, if they go there to get a few things to eat, not because they are listening to the messages. The wretched of the earth might be there out of destiny or misfortune. The damned are there because human agency put them there in that position. And this is what Frantz Fanon meant in his famous works. Now, what is another problem that we have in our democracy? A political culture of ungovernability. Poor delivery of services, gross economic inequalities, and political disaffection has found expression in violent protests, which in turn have trampled the very democracy we believe we are promoting. This could not be demonstrated better in protesting mobs, demonstrating their disenchantment with the political system, blocking highways, and inconveniencing the public that has nothing whatsoever with the source of the crowd's suffering. It is as if, because we suffer, the whole world should suffer with us. The idea is not only ethically indefensible, but also demonstrates an inability to differentiate between adversaries and allies, a situation that questions the existence of an intellectual capacity to solve problems. Solving problems through intimidation and blackmail does not yield sustainable outcomes, as no sooner does the adversary recover from the shock than he reverts to the original position. In the process and in the interim, the aggrieved victims alienate sympathy, further distancing their cause from the general will. Worse still, such actions build a momentum of their own, which culminates in a culture of impunity and lawlessness. Ungovernability is never a solution to a problem. At its worst, it is cutting one's nose permanently to spite one's face. We seem not to have learned our lessons from the 1980s to the early 1990s, when making the country ungovernable in order to remove apartheid yielded a residual which democracy cannot get rid of. An ungovernable society, as what we witness in service delivery and other political protests, in students' protests against fees, a number of other political hotspots, is worse than a poorly or badly governed state. Ungovernability respects no boundaries. In South Africa, the democratic deficit translates into a social laissez-faire where everybody in the name of freedom wishes to do as they please, or where a majority believes that because of its numbers, it can bulldoze everyone into compliance. We have a problem. Political violence, intimidation, murder, and other forms of criminal behavior. Over the past few years, and regrettably, the practice seems to be intensifying. We have witnessed violent disruptions of voter registration. We have witnessed inter- and intra-party violence in the lead to elections, especially local government elections. People die. Coupled with assassinations, this negates the very ethos upon which democracy operates. Further, parliamentarizations, starting from the national to local parliaments, have ceased to be consensus-building deliberations and have become theaters for the demonstration of majoritarianism. This does not only represent the tensions between competing conceptions of democracy, but also is symptomatic of the fierce rivalries fueled by the conceptions of political office as the source of power and opportunity to plunder public resources. What do we need in order to try and come out of this impasse? And it's very necessary to an audience like this representing what is going to be coming in the local government elections. What do we need to build to get South Africa into a respectable state? We are gathered here today to present the Charter of Election Ethics. The Charter carries messages to all role players in the elections and calls for integrity, objectivity, honesty, transparency, and service to society. The play that was demonstrated to us here, I wish it could translate into reality. That political parties, before accepting and nominating or choosing candidates, go through this scanning process. Are you worth the salt? Do you deserve to be in leadership? Or you're just going there for a career? An American political scientist once referred to politics as a form of entrepreneurship. Not a call to service and duty, but where people look for employment and entrepreneurship. If we could carry out this scanning process, we would have done a lot for South Africa. Are we going to do that? There could not be a clearer call for an ethically responsible operation. The call goes beyond elections and is a reminder to those who lead that political office is a call to duty and not an opportunity for personal aggrandizement. Political office is not a fiefdom. The philosopher Sandel refers to a leadership with an animating vision of a good society and the shared values of citizenship. A leadership with an animating vision of a good society and shared values of citizenship. At this moment in time, South Africa is in dire need for such leadership. And the MRM hopes that through these consultative processes with our political parties, we have started dialogues which will culminate in the realization of this dream. I thank you.